As Syria stands at critical crossroads, the appointment of Mohammed al-Bashir to form a new government signals potential shifts in the power structure. With Israel intensifying strikes on military sites and competing factions vying for influence, the future remains uncertain, with far-reaching implications for the broader Middle East. Tonight we uncover the threads of Syria's future, piecing together the intricate puzzle of hope, strategy and survival. I'm Hani Saif, and this is Think Tank. As Syria stands at critical crossroads, the appointment of Mohammed al-Bashir to form a new government signals potential shifts in the power structure. With Israel intensifying strikes on military sites and competing factions vying for influence, the future remains uncertain, with far-reaching implications for the broader Middle East. While celebrations erupted after the release of more than 100,000 detainees, concerns over a potential power vacuum looms large. US President Joe Biden described the moment as one of risk and uncertainty, warning of further instability in the Middle East. International efforts continue, including a closed-door UN Security Council meeting to address the unfolding crisis. Egypt has emphasized the need for a comprehensive, Syrian-led political process in Syria that is free from external interference. Egypt also calls for unity and stability to ensure inclusivity for all Syrian national forces, in line with the Security Council Resolution 2254. Egypt has highlighted the importance of restoring Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity while fostering dialogue among all Syrian groups. This will pave the way for rebuilding state institutions and securing Syria's rightful position in Arab and international communities. Egypt reaffirms its commitment to supporting Syria's political process, facilitating reconstruction, and ensuring the safe return of refugees and displaced Syrians. And providing further analysis on the latest updates in Syria, we're joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, the International Relations Specialist. Dr. Osman, thank you for joining us here on Think Tank. Let me ask you first, now given the latest developments in Syria, what are the most likely scenarios for the country's political future in the wake of the shifting alliances?
Thank you for having me, Hani. Greetings to you and your audience. Of course, Syria now is embarking upon a very foggy phase of its modern history. Now, Syria, for the first time since independence, has become basically, and we have to call things as they are, stateless. The Syrian state has collapsed a few days ago, and not only the Assad regime, the basic services and the basic institutions of the country are barely functioning. Most importantly, the security and military institutions, as evident by what has happened over the past couple of weeks. So now Syria is embarking upon a very challenging phase, or a very challenging period that it has ahead. And it poses a question, the question whether the current new government that has been formed today will be able to undertake its duties in order to fulfill the basic functions of a government, basically, because there are many questions regarding that. And the reason I say this is that this new government of Mohammed al-Bashir, which was basically formed by and it's basically its patron is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, is a caretaker government, and its term is actually very brief if we are to go with the official statements they released today. This government will only stay in power until March 2025. What can be accomplished in a country devastated by civil war for the past 13 years, with 600,000 people dead. More than half of the urban infrastructure has been destroyed or damaged by the war. There are 13 million people displaced, 6 million internally, and 6 million externally as refugees. So these are immense challenges. And of course, the days ahead will reveal whether this new government can actually tackle these challenges in an efficient manner.
Mm-hmm. Then, speaking of this transitional government, how significant is the agreement between the Syrian factions on Mohammed al-Bashir's government formation? What should we read into it?
Well, what we should read into it, as I said before, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, are the ones who chose Mr. Mohammed al-Bashir. And let's not forget that Mr. Mohammed al-Bashir was the head of the so-called Salvation Government in Idlib, and it was basically a shadow government established by the militants in Idlib that was supposed to be parallel to that of Damascus, and they were seeking recognition and legitimacy, but they received none. Now they have become the sole governing force, arguably the sole governing force in Syria, and of course they are not, because let's not forget that we have another government in the city of
Yes.
Azaz.
Dr. Osman, pardon me, but I'll have to cut you off because now we're going to turn live to the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's arrival to Ireland, marking the conclusion of his European tour. That was live footage of the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's arrival to Ireland, and as we saw, he was greeted by many Egyptian citizens outside of the hotel. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue our discussion with Dr. Mohammed Osman, the International Affairs Specialist. Dr. Osman, pardon me, but let's continue our conversation now. Egypt has called for a Syrian-led political process free of external influence to shape the future of Syria's stability and regional role. How feasible is it, and what challenges might lay ahead?
As always, Egypt always adopts very responsible stances in its foreign policy that are balanced and sane and centered on the idea of sovereignty and the unity of the state and peaceful coexistence and the respect of state sovereignty. And this is what the statement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs today reflected. These are the founding principles of Egyptian foreign policy. And of course, Egypt has a very historic and deep relationship with Syria that goes way back in history, maybe even has ties to the days of the pharaohs, maybe. And in modern history, of course, there is an abundance of common heritage and common political cooperation and even economic relations up until the war, of course. That gives them a very vested interest. That gives Egypt a very vested interest in Syrian stability and unity. And this is what was reflected today by the Foreign Ministry's press release, and also by the phone call Minister Badr Abdulati held with Hakan Fidan, the foreign minister of Turkey, and they did agree on these same principles. And I think that the Arab countries led by Egypt and maybe even Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, United Arab Emirates should have an expanded role in supporting Syria in its transition to a stable, democratic state open to diversity, and most of all, a unified Syria, which is much more than I can say about the current state of affairs in Syria, of course.
Well, so how do the ongoing Israeli attacks on Syria's infrastructure impact the political landscape, and why isn't the new government responding to these provocations?
Yes, I love how you let that out of that question now, because it's related to the end of my previous statement, and that is Syria today is divided. Syria today is subjected to rounds and rounds of Israeli aggression. It started way before the collapse of the Assad regime, but now they're not just periodic airstrikes here and there. Now Israel is carrying out a full-out land grab inside Syria. They are carrying out an invasion. Let's call a spade a spade. And now they have taken control of the buffer zone. They went about 21 kilometers deep, according to some reports, and they have now controlled Jabal al-Sheikh, which is a very strategic part of southern Syria and the Golan Heights, in the intersection between Syria and Lebanon and the occupied Golan Heights. Also, they have even advanced today, reportedly, even though they denied, but it seems that they're lying, because most other independent media outlets are confirming it, and also Syrian sources. They advanced to the countryside of the capital, Damascus, which is a very, very dangerous precedent and a very dangerous escalation as well. And now the Israeli defense minister, Israel Katz, openly announced that they are going to establish a so-called exclusive defensive zone in southern Syria. So that means that they are not tied by or contained by the buffer zone anymore, as they announced. So that means there is an occupation project in southern Syria, more Israeli expansion, and that the Israelis are basically, the Israeli government is lying about its intentions, including what they said, that this will be a temporary affair, or a temporary presence, or a temporary measure. However, the 1967 occupation of the Golan Heights and the West Bank and Gaza started out as a temporary measure that lasted for over 50 years. Now, the current government in Syria, which is now in its first hours in office, they have not released so far a single statement regarding what has been going on. Not even the factions that formed this government, formed this government led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, have released anything regarding these blatant acts of Israeli aggression that serve to destroy and completely dismantle the military infrastructure of the Syrian state, which means if they decide to reestablish the Syrian armed forces one day, they will not be able to find anything to equip it with.
Then, sir, then how do you assess the silence or the new regime's strategies or handling of the Israeli ongoing strikes on Syrian military facilities, especially regarding the international responses?
Because this gives us an idea of what happened with the fall of Assad, basically. That the fall of Assad was orchestrated, I believe, and supported fully by the United States and other regional players. And Israel, of course, I believe, was involved. Israel has a history of supporting many rebel factions inside Syria, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham at some point, under the pretext of treating the wounded and even opening refuge for some of the militants that used to escape while fighting the Syrian army in southern Syria. So they do have a previous relationship, and this was admitted by former senior Israeli officials. This is no conspiracy theory. a former head of Mossad, for example, did openly admit that on live television on numerous occasions. So
Yes.
Israel does have ties and certain understandings with these factions, and maybe these factions are willing to be on the receiving end or accept or tolerate Israel's transgressions in return for Israel not obstructing their path to power, which is a very dangerous indication, to be honest. And it raises questions about the compromises that are being made in order to enact some sort of political change in
Yes.
Syria. However, what happened has happened, and the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad does not exist anymore. And now we have a new reality on the ground. And this new government is required at least to attempt to mobilize international support against Israel's transgressions. In terms of international support, the UN condemned what happened, and they called it a clear violation of the 1974 disengagement agreement, and it is, of course, that. And if I may add, it's a violation of the UN Charter and many other basic international laws and the concept of state sovereignty, and also, of course, the Arab League and many Arab states, starting with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, they have opened, and Turkey as well, they have openly, Iran openly condemned Israel's actions. However, it doesn't seem that the international community is doing anything about it. And why? Because Israel, reportedly, the United States, according to various reports, has consented to Israel's behavior inside Syria. And this is also a very dangerous indication, since the 1974 agreement was brokered by the United States. So now they are to stand silently while Israel basically abrogates one agreement after another. This means that they are embracing Netanyahu's brazen threats from the UN podium to create a new Middle East and basically redraw the entire map of the Middle East. If we are to allow this to happen, and if they are to allow this to happen, they are opening the door for more chaos and violence in the region and in Syria, of course.
Yes. Dr. Osman, please stay with us. We'll continue our conversation, but let us take a moment now to explore Syria's political future, which is increasingly uncertain, shaped by the ongoing instability, exacerbated by foreign aggression and deepening regional tensions.
The political future of Syria remains uncertain amidst the ongoing changes and significant shifts in the region's political dynamics. Recently, the situation has become more complex as new political developments unfold, including growing instability due to a sudden renewal of internal fighting and foreign interventions. Syria's political future can be shaped by multiple scenarios. One possibility is continued fragmentation, where various factions maintain control over different regions, leading to prolonged instability. Another potential outcome could involve a shift towards some form of negotiated settlement, which might result in a power-sharing arrangement or a more decentralized form of governance. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham trying to create a transitional authority in the meantime, which will be headed by Mohammed al-Bashir. However, this scenario faces many obstacles due to entrenched rivalries and conflicting foreign interests. The ongoing Israeli aggression on Syrian territory further complicates the situation. Israeli invasion of southern Syria, its airstrikes targeting main army and navy bases, as well as some civilian establishments in Syria, have high intentions, adding an external layer of volatility. This aggression exacerbates regional security concerns, affecting neighboring countries such as Lebanon, Iraq, and Jordan, which are all impacted by spillover violence within the region. Ultimately, Syrian political trajectory will profoundly influence Middle Eastern stability, as its outcome will dictate regional alliances, security dynamics, and the broader Arab-Israeli conflict. The future of Syria remains tied to both domestic aspirations and international geopolitical calculations. This can also be hindered by internal and external obstacles as well.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We continue our conversation and discussion with Dr. Osman. Sir, now a lot of Syrian factions have agreed upon the new transitional government, but are there signs of a general reconciliation between the conflicting parties within Syria, Or is division inevitable and it's just a matter of time?
I wish I can be an optimist, but we are far from that point. And if we are to start with what's happening in Syria, the many aspects of division that we are seeing right now, for starters, the SDF, which is a coalition of Kurdish factions, for example, control about 30% to 35% of Syria's territory, including the Kurdish regions in the northeast and the city of Deir ez-Zor in the east and the border with Iraq. And of course, it doesn't seem that these factions are in a harmonious relationship with the other armed factions that took power in Syria. And of course, since Turkey is one of the main patrons and the main supporters of the new Syrian government, or the factions that constitute the new Syrian government, and they are in a state of open hostility with these Kurdish factions that they claim are tied to the PKK, a secessionist terrorist organization inside Turkey, then of course we do not see how stability will be attained. And as we speak, some factions that are bankrolled and armed by Turkey are fighting the Kurdish militants or the Kurdish armed groups in cities like Manbij, for example, in the northeast. And even there are reports of Turkish airstrikes to support these militants. So, for example, this is one picture of discord and disunity that we see in Syria, for example. Another one is, as far as I know, there was a second government in the city of Azaz formed by the so-called Syrian National Army, which was also funded and supported by Turkey. And this transitional government, as far as I know, did not disband yet. So as we speak, there is another government in Syria, another rebel government. So will it disband and join the one in Damascus? These questions remain to be answered. Mm-hmm. And with this coalition that is within the ruling entity in Damascus that will basically, or probably will receive some sort of international recognition, are they a cohesive political force, or are they just a ragtag of armed groups and factions that were only united by the goal to topple Assad? Because they come from various ideological backgrounds. Yes, most of them are of the Islamist inclination. However, they are different. Some of them are jihadists, some of them are not jihadists, some of them are pragmatic, some of them really aren't. And we can even see that from the videos that we have seen coming out of Damascus and the behavior displayed by many of these armed factions. So, for example, you find the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Ahmad al-Shtar'a, also known, of course, as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, a former, or not a former, he still is listed as an international terrorist, so that we can remind our audiences as well. He spoke very tolerant words and with a very reconciliatory tone, for example. However, members of his own movement and other armed factions are going on a killing spree on some parts of Syria, and are killing POWs and are killing former army soldiers, and there is video evidence of that. So do they actually exercise actual control over their militants and their armed elements on the ground? This remains to be seen. So, and at the end, are they willing to restore the military and security integrity of the Syrian state? Now the Syrian army basically does not exist anymore. Are they willing to reconstitute the army in order to maintain, and the security services, albeit of course after reforming them, to maintain some sort of stability, or would they be content with the current armed formations that are far from organized, for example? Yes. So these all remain to be seen.
Dr. Osman, one final question now. What about other parties concerned? How do global powers, namely Russia and the US, perceive the current Syrian government? And what are the expected next moves?
Well, let's start with the United States. The US, of course, as I said before, I believe they had a big role, and President Biden even took credit for the fall of President Assad. So the Americans are content with the results of what happened, and it seems now they are discussing basically trying to pitch the idea that they may drop or raise Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from the terrorism lists. This will be a major act of recognizing the current state of affairs inside Syria. And the United States maintains a military presence inside Syria in order to fight ISIS and to protect the oil fields as well. This is what they won't admit, but President Trump in his previous administration did admit that very openly while he was president. So for their part, they will have to try to mediate the conflict between their two allies, the armed factions that control Damascus and parts of northern Syria and central Syria, and the Kurds, who are also funded and supported by the United States. On the other hand, Russia, they received a major blow by what has happened, but it seemed that what happened was basically coordinated with the Russians, because they did not put up a fight to protect President Assad. And it seems that their bases, the Hmaymim air base and a huge naval base in Tartus, are untouched so far. It's reported that they have reached an understanding with the militants not to attack them. However, is this a temporary accommodation of the Russians, or will the Russians manage to maintain a permanent presence in Syria? However, they are not as much as an influential actor as they used to be anymore.
Dr. Mohammed Osman, the International Relations Specialist from Cairo, thank you very much for your insights and for joining us here, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, the whole world and the international community will be following the situation in Syria with a very close eye, and so will Q News. That's all the time we have for this edition of Think Tank, but stay tuned for more news and updates here on Q News. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.